Hey guys, tonight we drift back thousands of years, where the heat of Mesopotamia presses down on your shoulders, and the smell of incense mixes with dust in the air. You're walking down narrow alleys, the walls of mud brick houses leaning in on you, the rickety reed mats hanging in doorways, and somewhere ahead the temple towers over everything. Torches flicker even though the sun hasn't fully set, and smoke curls up from braziers at the entrance. That's where you're headed, toward a life most people wouldn't envy. You probably won't survive this in one piece, but since this is a sleepy history story, you'll manage to drift through, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing the little constellation of viewers glowing around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The temple's shadow stretches over you, and everything feels slightly muffled here, like the bricks themselves are absorbing sound. Your sandals scuff the ground, kicking up that familiar chalky dust. You can almost taste it, mixing with the bitter tang of burning resin. The entrance is busy, priests shuffling scrolls, young boys carrying jars of beer. Merchants muttering about offerings, and you, pressed into this life, are just another piece of the machinery. You think for a moment how ironic it is that a space meant for God smells more like sweaty bodies and goat hides than divine presence. Above, banners flap lazily in the evening wind. Each one is marked with the symbol of Inanna or Ishtar, depending on who's in favor this year. Their stars and lions loom over you like watchful eyes. Everyone in the city knows this temple. It's not just a holy site but also a kind of marketplace, courthouse, and social hub. You step inside and the light changes, sun replaced by smoky lamp glow. The air thickens, as if it wants to push you back out, but you keep moving. You notice the floor is worn smooth by countless feet, thousands upon thousands who came before you to pray, beg, trade, or serve. And here you are, not out of choice but because someone higher decided that this was your path. Historians still argue whether these temple roles were prestigious or degrading, but from your tired bones, it feels less like an honor and more like a trap. Inside, incense coils around pillars painted with faded myths. You see Ishtar's figure carved again and again, fierce, winged, holding weapons, yet also draped in fertility symbols. The contradictions mirror your own situation. One moment you're supposed to embody divine allure, the next you're just scrubbing floors with reeds soaked in sour water. A quirky tidbit: some old cuneiform tablets describe recipes for incense that mix frankincense with ground cedar and, oddly enough, animal dung, so if your nose wrinkles at the smell, you're not imagining it. Someone actually wrote it down like a proud chef sharing their signature dish. As you move deeper, the sound changes too. Chants echo from a side chamber, low voices repeating lines so monotonous you wonder if the priests ever fall asleep mid-prayer. A goat bleats in protest somewhere, tied up and waiting for sacrifice. The contrast between divine symbols and very real livestock is almost comical. Imagine visiting a modern cathedral only to find a rowdy cow chewing cud near the altar. That's the temple reality here. The alleyways outside still hum faintly in your mind, but now it's the temple's world that traps you. You glance at niches in the wall stuffed with little clay figurines. They stare at you with blank eyes, offerings from hopeful citizens who wanted the gods' favor. Most are broken, crumbling with time. You can't help but think that's how most people in this city end up, worn down, left in corners, forgotten except as a shadow of devotion. A priest passes by, his robe trailing dust, and he doesn't meet your eyes. To him, you're just part of the background, one of dozens of temple workers who blur into anonymity. You might smile bitterly at that, except smiling isn't really encouraged. Better to look solemn, as though you truly believe every detail of ritual matters. And maybe it does, but you can't shake the thought that most of it feels like endless repetition for the sake of keeping power where it is. You shuffle toward your assigned space. Tonight, Maybe it's helping to light lamps, or maybe standing in the shadows while important men mumble prayers and glance your way as though you're part of the furniture. The temple streets outside are fading now, the chatter and clatter replaced by thick ritual silence. And you, once just a child wandering alleys, are now trapped within these walls that smell of smoke, sweat, and the faint sweetness of figs left as offerings but already starting to rot. You sigh, though softly, because sighing too loudly might earn a sharp rebuke. You wonder how many nights stretch ahead exactly like this one: torches, incense, chants, duties. It's hard to count when every day feels the same shade of dust. Still, you keep walking. The temple looms larger inside than out, as though it has swallowed you whole. And maybe it has. You're still inside the temple, the flickering lamps casting uneven shadows across the painted bricks. The noise from outside has faded completely now, and the atmosphere feels heavier, almost like the air itself wants to remind you that this isn't a place for choice. You remember how people outside whisper that becoming a temple prostitute is some divine honor, a chance to live closer to the gods. But standing here with the resin smoke stinging your throat, you can tell there's less glory and more obligation. The truth is, you didn't really get to say yes or no. Maybe your family offered you here because they thought it would win divine favor, or maybe because they couldn't afford to feed another mouth at home. Either way, sacred vows are nothing like the romantic promises we picture in movies. In Mesopotamia, vows are contracts, binding agreements carved in clay. Once your name is tied to the goddess's service, you can't just shrug and walk away. Historians still argue whether some girls entered willingly, or if the temple pulled them in through social pressure. Either way, you don't exactly feel like you signed up for this on your own. You shuffle closer to a carved stele that describes temple duties. The inscriptions are hard to read, but you know the gist. You'll spend your days performing rituals, keeping the temple clean, and waiting for moments when priests decide your body is part of the ceremony. It's not about personal desire, it's about obligation. And the way priests talk about it, you're not even really a person in these moments. You're a vessel, a tool for channeling the goddess. It sounds lofty when they say it, but try standing in that position for hours, or putting on the same heavy jewelry for yet another ritual, and you'll see how quickly divine becomes exhausting. You can't help but imagine what life would have been like if you hadn't been brought here. Out there, you might be hauling clay bricks with laborers, or weaving in a small home, or bartering at the market for lentils. Those lives look dull, but they come with freedom, to laugh too loudly, to eat when you like, to choose who you spend the night with. In here, even your smile belongs to someone else. There's a quirky little tidbit historians sometimes bring up. Some tablets suggest that these temple women weren't even always involved in sexual rites, but instead handled chores, prayers, and hospitality for visitors. Imagine the disappointment of being called a sacred prostitute by history, when in reality, most of your job was sweeping floors or pouring watered-down beer for cranky priests. Maybe it's better than the alternative, but still, not exactly the glamorous destiny people imagine. One of the senior women passes by, jangling with beads and smelling faintly of sesame oil. Her eyes catch yours for just a moment, and you see something strange: resignation. She's lived this life long enough to stop fighting it, but not long enough to forget that she once had choices. She adjusts her shawl, nods faintly, and keeps walking. That little nod feels like a whole lecture. Don't complain. Don't resist. Just endure. You move toward your mat in a corner. The reed fibers creak as you sit down, and the cool floor presses through. You look up at the temple's ceiling beams, blackened by years of smoke. Somewhere above, pigeons roost, and their soft cooing trickles down into the silence. It's strangely comforting. At least the birds get to leave whenever they want. The priest who oversees your chamber appears, holding a clay tablet covered in fresh inscriptions. He doesn't bother to explain. He just gestures for you and a few others to rise. The rituals tonight involve chanting verses about Inanna's descent into the underworld. You know the story well, How the goddess gave up piece after piece of her clothing and jewelry as she went down, only to be trapped until clever schemes freed her. It's supposed to be symbolic of death and rebirth, but you can't help noticing how often the goddess's sacrifices are turned into justifications for your own. You're expected to strip down parts of yourself, your privacy, your choice, your body, in the name of holy order. You sigh softly, joining the line. The stone floor is cold under your bare feet. The chant begins, monotonous and low, and you try to match the rhythm. Your voice feels like it belongs to someone else. By the time the ritual ends, your throat is dry, your head aches. And you can barely keep your eyes open. And yet, this is just one night among countless more. Historians still debate whether this was considered a high calling or a burdensome one. Some evidence suggests temple women had a kind of protected status, shielded from certain punishments or given basic provisions for life. But standing here, your skin itchy from incense smoke and your stomach grumbling for real food, it doesn't feel like protection, it feels like being caged, wrapped in divine language so no one notices the bars. You collapse back onto your reed mat at the end of it all. Outside, the city quiets into its night rhythm, dogs barking faintly, the splash of someone dumping water into a gutter. The soft strum of a lyre in a distant courtyard. You hear it all, but it feels miles away. Here in the temple, you live by vows you never chose, in rituals that drain more than they fill. You pull your shawl over your face, breathing through the rough fibers. Tomorrow will look just like today, and the day after that, and the day after that. The goddess may be eternal, but you, wrapped in these vows, feel more like a shadow than a soul. The night bleeds into morning before you've really rested, and already the temple stirs again. Reed mats rustle, sandals scrape, voices murmur in the courtyard. You rise stiffly, shawl clinging to your shoulders, and there's no time to stretch or yawn. The day belongs not to you but to the goddess, and that means every breath you take is technically hers. The priests never let you forget it. Your body is dedicated to Inanna, or Ishtar, depending on which name is carved over the arch this season. To them, the goddess owns you in the same way a farmer owns his plow. It's a strange idea, being property of the goddess. Some citizens respect you for it, they might bow a little lower when you pass. Not because you're powerful, but because you're an extension of divine will. Others whisper behind your back, calling you polluted or unlucky, as though the goddess's shadow stains everything you touch. Either way, you don't get to define yourself anymore. You're a walking paradox, honored but mocked, visible but voiceless. A priestess once told you, in a rare moment of honesty, that dedicating your body to Inanna is like becoming a living statue. People look at you as a symbol, not as a human being. If you laugh too loudly or admit you miss home, they frown as though the goddess herself has cracked. You're not supposed to have personal feelings. You're supposed to be a constant reminder of divine presence. Historians still argue whether that made your role empowering, because you were tied to a goddess of war and love, or suffocating, because it erased your individuality. From where you sit on the cool bricks, it definitely feels like the latter, and the symbolism is relentless. The jewelry you wear isn't just decoration, every bead, every carved stone represents a myth. When you drape the gold chain around your waist, you're reenacting the girdle of Ishtar. When you smear the thick kohl around your eyes, it's supposed to echo the goddess's fierce gaze. Even your simplest gestures, pouring beer into a clay cup, offering bread to a visitor, are framed as the goddess moving through you. If you trip and spill something, well, maybe Inanna wanted to make a point. Convenient excuse for clumsiness, at least. Quirky tidbit here, some temple inscriptions suggest that dedicating one's body to the goddess wasn't always permanent. In a few rare cases, women served for a set number of years, then returned to normal life. Imagine the awkward conversations at the market after that. Oh, weren't you once the goddess's vessel? You'd never quite escape the label. Even if you were technically free. Like trying to convince your neighbors you're retired from being a rock star after only one album. As the day warms, you move through corridors darkened by smoke. A priest reminds you and the others, the goddess owns your steps, so walk gracefully, the goddess owns your voice, so chant clearly, the goddess owns your hands, so keep them soft and clean. Every part of you becomes sacred real estate. You sometimes wonder what would happen if you refused, if you said, actually, these are my hands, and I'd like to use them to slap someone. Probably a quick and painful punishment. The law is strict about temple vows, and punishments can be cruel. You've overheard enough stories. A woman who left the temple without permission. Shaved head, public shame, maybe worse. A woman who dared to sneak food meant for offerings. Beatings or exile. The goddess's ownership doesn't come with a gentle touch, it comes with iron rules. Historians still debate whether these accounts are exaggerated by rival cities trying to make each other look bad, but you've seen enough fear in people's eyes to know some of it's true. Sometimes, though, you find yourself almost convinced. Inanna is fierce, after all, the goddess of both love and battle. She storms the heavens, brings kings to their knees, and dances with lions at her side. If she truly walks through you, then maybe you're not just a servant, you're something greater, a human shimmering with divine energy. It's a thought that helps you endure the endless ceremonies, though it usually fades the moment your stomach growls and someone shoves another bowl of bland barley porridge at you. You catch sight of your reflection in a bronze mirror propped against a wall. The metal is warped, so your face bends strangely, but you recognize yourself, or what's left of you. Coal smudges under your eyes, your lips cracked from incense smoke, your hair smelling of sesame oil. You look older than you feel, as though the goddess's ownership has already stolen years from your life. You lean closer, wondering if anyone outside would even know your name anymore, or just call you the goddess's woman. The mirror doesn't answer, of course. It only throws your tired image back at you, bent like the reed mats you sleep on. You adjust your shawl and turn away. Somewhere, a goat bleats again, another sacrifice. Somewhere else, a priest calls out instructions. And you, still caught in vows that weren't yours to make, walk forward on the goddess's borrowed feet, with no real sense of where they'll carry you next. The morning stretches on, and the dull hum of temple life wraps around you like a heavy cloak. There's no sudden drama, no glamorous festival music right now, just endless routine. If someone told you that being a temple worker meant wild nights of passion, they clearly never spent 12 hours cleaning soot off lamps. Most of your days are an exercise in monotony. You start with ritual purification. That sounds dramatic, but in practice it's you splashing tepid water over your hands and feet while muttering half-remembered words. The basin is cracked, the water's gone a little stale, and the priest supervising looks like he hasn't smiled since the last lunar eclipse. You suppress a yawn. Yes, you're purified, though honestly, a proper bath would do more good. After that comes chanting. The tablets have lines upon lines of hymns to Inanna, and you repeat them until the syllables blur. She who rides the lion, she of the shining crown, she who breaks the mountain. Over and over, your voice rising and falling with the others, until your throat feels coated with dust. Sometimes you accidentally slip a word, and no one notices because they're half asleep too. Historians still argue whether these chants were meant as true worship or just background noise to keep the temple's atmosphere buzzing. Either way, they make you feel like a human drum, pounding out the same beat until it loses meaning. Then there's cleaning. Always cleaning. The incense leaves greasy black smears on the walls, and you scrub until your knuckles ache. Reed brooms shed constantly, so you sweep twice as much as necessary, scattering tiny stalks that crunch underfoot. The temple is supposed to represent cosmic order, but it feels more like you're stuck in an eternal battle with dust bunnies. A quirky tidbit, some records mention temple attendants using purification mixtures of beer and ash to scrub floors. Imagine mopping with warm, flat beer, it smells exactly as unholy as you'd think. When you're not chanting or scrubbing, you're preparing offerings. That means stacking figs in little pyramids, pouring watered-down wine into jars, and arranging bread loaves so they look appealing to divine eyes. Of course, the gods don't eat them. The priests do. You'd think divine beings might appreciate fresh food, but apparently stale bread and lukewarm wine still count as sacred once they've been waved in front of a statue. You smirk at the thought, but only internally. Sarcasm doesn't go over well here, the monotony eats at you, yet strangely, it also dulls you into a kind of calm. There's a rhythm in routine: chant, scrub, arrange, repeat. Hours pass without your really noticing. As though you're floating through honey-thick time. Maybe that's the secret: keep people too busy to think, and they won't question why their bodies belong to the goddess. Still, boredom has sharp edges. Sometimes you catch yourself giggling at tiny absurdities, like a priest tripping on his own robe or a cat sneaking into the temple to steal fish off an offering plate. Once, you saw a fellow worker accidentally drop a loaf of bread, then scoop it back onto the altar, whispering the goddess won't mind. You had to bite your lip to keep from laughing. Of course, the priests would say the goddess sees all, but if she notices every crumb, she must be incredibly bored too. Midday comes with another round of rituals. This one involves standing motionless while incense smoke curls around you, your eyes watering until tears streak your cheeks. The priests say the smoke carries prayers upward. You wonder if it also carries your headaches. Historians still debate whether these ceremonies had real spiritual impact or were mostly theatrical performances for the community. From your perspective, they feel like elaborate ways to turn lungs into ashtrays. By evening, your body feels hollowed out. You've spoken words that weren't yours, moved your hands in gestures dictated centuries ago, and stared at walls until the painted lions seemed to blink. You think about what's outside: streets filled with chatter, children playing in courtyards, bakers selling hot bread. Out there, people complain about their daily grind. In here, your grind is a literal hymn cycle. You envy them, even as they might envy the supposed honor of your role. The day ends the same way it began: purification. Another splash of stale water, another muttered line. Your skin feels tight with sweat and incense grime, but there's no real bath waiting. Just a reed mat, a scratchy shawl, and the promise of doing it all again tomorrow. You sink down, your muscles twitching with exhaustion. And as your eyes droop shut, you think, if this is sacred duty, it's the most boring kind of holiness imaginable. The next morning, before the sky even blushes with dawn, you're shaken awake. No gentle stretches or leisurely breakfast here. The temple runs on the schedules of its patrons, and today, that means important visitors. You rub your eyes, wishing you could burrow back into the reeds, but instead you pull your shawl around your shoulders and prepare to be paraded. Patrons arrive with the kind of pomp only Mesopotamian elites can manage. Kings, priests, wealthy merchants, all strutting under embroidered robes, their sandals dusted off by servants before they even cross the threshold. They carry offerings, baskets of dates, gleaming jugs of wine, and little clay figurines stamped with prayers. They talk loudly, making sure everyone hears about their generosity. You keep your head low, because your role here isn't to speak, it's to be seen. The dynamic is painfully clear. These men hold the power, and they know it. They bow before the goddess's statue with elaborate gestures, then glance sideways at you and the others with the same appraising look they give livestock. For them, the temple isn't just a place of worship, it's a stage to display wealth, masculinity, and control. Historians still argue whether these encounters were symbolic rituals or actual physical acts, but from your perspective, the ambiguity doesn't soften the weight of expectation. You shuffle closer when summoned. Your bare feet whispering against the cool floor. A merchant leans in with the smell of figs and sweat clinging to his beard. His ringed fingers brush against your arm, and you freeze, not because you're surprised but because you've trained yourself not to react. The priest overseeing the ritual clears his throat, loud enough to remind everyone this isn't just about desire, but about honoring the goddess. Convenient how divine honor always lines up with elite indulgence. There's a quirky detail here. Some records suggest that in certain temples, elite patrons would leave with a clay tablet receipt confirming their ritual participation. Imagine the awkwardness of walking through the market holding a stamped record that essentially says, "Yes, I supported the temple in a very personal way." Whether those receipts really existed or not, you can't help picturing one blowing down the street, picked up by some confused child. Meanwhile, your own role in this exchange feels hollow. You don't see devotion in the patron's eyes, you see calculation. Kings use the temple to legitimize their rule, priests use it to expand their authority, merchants use it to boost their reputations. And you're the prop. A living symbol of divine access, paraded like jewelry, meant to make the whole spectacle feel authentic. You can sense the hierarchy in every glance. A priest nods approvingly when a wealthy donor offers gold, but barely hides his disdain when a poorer man brings a handful of barley. To them, devotion has a price tag, and the goddess's favor seems suspiciously tied to silver shekels. You're left wondering whether the gods actually care about these offerings, or if it's all just another way for the powerful to stay powerful. At one point, a high priest orders you to pour wine for the assembled men. The jug is heavy, sloshing as you move, and you concentrate on not spilling. They laugh loudly at each other's jokes, their voices booming through the chamber. No one speaks to you directly, but you feel their eyes following every motion, an appraisal cloaked in ritual language. You set each cup down carefully, your hands steady from practice, though inside your stomach churns. Historians still debate whether temple prostitutes were seen as priestesses in their own right or as expendable workers under priestly authority. In practice, it seems to depend on who's watching. When the crowd is impressed, you're blessed by Inanna. When something goes wrong, you're polluted or unworthy. Either way, the men around you never risk their status, you do. The ritual drags on for hours, the air thick with incense and wine fumes. By the time the last patron leaves, boasting about how the goddess surely favors him now, you feel wrung out like a wet cloth. The priests tally up the offerings, stacking baskets and counting coins. You sit off to the side, ignored again. Reduced once more to background furniture now that your symbolic usefulness has passed, when the temple doors close, silence falls heavy. You stretch your aching shoulders, thinking about the absurdity of it all. These powerful men strut in, eager to prove their devotion, but you know they'll forget the goddess the moment they step back into their palaces or shops. And you'll still be here tomorrow, waiting for the next round of patrons, the next performance, the next reminder that power never really belongs to you. When the last echoes of the patron's footsteps fade, you retreat to the quieter corners of the temple. The show of power is over, but you're still here, stuck in the grind of survival. You shuffle toward the storage rooms, where temple workers distribute food and mats for the night. It's not glamorous, but it's the part of life that actually keeps you breathing, barely. Food in the temple isn't about pleasure, it's about fuel. You line up with the others, waiting for a clay bowl of barley porridge. Sometimes it's flavored with onions or dates if the temple has been especially well stocked by offerings, but most days it's bland, gluey, and lukewarm. You scoop it up with a chunk of coarse bread. Chewing slowly because there's nothing else to distract your taste buds. You think longingly of market stalls outside, where the smell of grilled lamb and honey cakes must be drifting even now. Of course, those aren't for you. The goddess provides, but she doesn't provide variety. Quirky tidbit here. Some records suggest temple kitchens sometimes flavored beer with herbs to make it taste less sour. Unfortunately, the temple workers like you rarely got the fancy versions. What you sip is watery, flat, and sour enough to make your lips pucker. Still, it keeps your stomach from growling too loudly during rituals. As for where you sleep, privacy is a luxury you'll never know here. The temple sets aside long chambers lined with reed mats. Each one barely wide enough to stretch your arms. You claim a spot and roll up your shawl to use as a pillow. Around you, Other workers murmur quietly, sharing stories or complaints in hushed voices. Some cry softly into their mats, trying not to be heard. The walls echo with snores, sighs, and the occasional cough. You learn to tune it all out, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. And sleep isn't always restful. Mosquitoes buzz overhead, and sometimes you wake up scratching red welts. Fleas lurk in the reeds, biting at your ankles. You try to pull your shawl tighter, but it's always a losing battle. Historians still argue whether temple workers lived in separate quarters from priests or all together. Wherever it was, comfort wasn't the priority. The mats creak, the air smells of sweat and smoke, and dreams rarely come easy. During the rare quiet moments, you stare at the ceiling beams, blackened by years of oil lamp smoke. You imagine life outside, families gathered in courtyards, children curled up beside their mothers, a dog stretched lazily at their feet. You wonder if anyone in those homes thinks of you now. Probably not. To them, you're part of the goddess's household, swallowed up by the temple. Even bathing is a collective experience. Once or twice a week, if you're lucky, you get a splash of river water ladled over your head in the courtyard. There's no soap, just gritty sand to scrub at your skin. It helps scrape away the sweat and dust, but it leaves you raw, like you've been polished instead of clean. Still, you savor the coolness while it lasts, even as you hear someone muttering, "Don't waste the goddess's water." The strangest part is how quickly you adapt. At first, the lack of privacy gnawed at you. Eating from shared bowls, sleeping shoulder to shoulder, never truly alone. But over time, the rhythm dulls you. Your body learns to take comfort where it can, in a brief breeze sneaking through a doorway, in the rare sweetness of a date slipped into your ration, in the muffled laughter of another worker telling a joke under their breath. Tonight, you curl onto your mat again. The reeds creak, your shawl smells faintly of smoke and sesame oil, and the chorus of snores around you swells. You're not comfortable, but you're too exhausted to care. The temple has drained every bit of strength, and now survival is just about closing your eyes and hoping for a few hours of peace before dawn pulls you back into the same cycle again. By dawn the next day, the temple comes alive again, and with it come the endless hazards that gnaw at your body over time. You wake with your joints aching from the hard reed mat, scratch at the red dots left by fleas, and shuffle toward your duties. It feels like every part of this life is designed to wear you down. The incense alone is enough to do that. You're expected to help burn it at every ritual, feeding lumps of resin onto hot coals until smoke thickens the air. At first it smells exotic, almost pleasant, a sharp, pine-like tang with a faint sweetness. But after hours of breathing it in, your eyes sting, your throat burns, and a cough rattles in your chest that never fully leaves. Archaeologists have found residue of resins like frankincense and myrrh in temple sites, but imagine breathing those day after day, with no escape from the haze. You sometimes wonder if the goddess enjoys the smoke, or if it's only mortals who choke on it. Then there's the endless physical strain. You haul jars of water from the river to keep the temple clean. You grind barley into meal for offerings, pushing the heavy stone pestle back and forth until your arms shake. The looms demand long hours of weaving, thread over thread, eyes straining in dim lamplight. By the end of the day, your fingers are raw, your back stiff, your head pounding, and that's before illness strikes. The city around you is a breeding ground for disease. Open sewers run along the streets. Mosquitoes swarm near the canals. Children cough with fevers that spread through families in days. In the temple, bodies packed close together make sickness inevitable. Someone sneezes during a chant, someone else starts sweating under their robes, and within a week you're laid low with chills and a stomach that won't hold food. There's no medicine beyond herbs and prayers. A priest might recite incantations over you, waving smoldering reeds to drive out demons, but whether you recover depends on your body's stubbornness, not the ritual. Quirky detail: clay tablets list medical prescriptions that sound almost like recipes. Mix crushed turtle shell with beer, swallow 3 times a day. Whether they worked or not is another question. You're never sure if what you're given is healing or just another excuse to drink sour beer. Some hazards creep up more quietly. Your skin cracks from constant exposure to dust and heat. Your teeth ache from chewing endless barley bread. Parasites, invisible but persistent, sap your energy until even climbing temple stairs feels like hauling a stone block. Sometimes, when you look in polished bronze, you hardly recognize your own reflection, eyes ringed with dark circles, skin sallow, hair tangled. What gnaws at you most is that these struggles don't feel like punishments, they're simply the fabric of existence here. Everyone around you accepts them with a weary shrug. The priests cough too, the guards scratch at flea bites, the other workers limp with sore backs. No one expects comfort. Comfort is for kings reclining on couches, for merchants with their storerooms full of dates and oils, not for you. And yet, despite the grinding hardship, you still rise each day. You sweep the floors. You pour the libations. You bow when the high priest passes, even if your knees threaten to buckle. Because in this world, stopping isn't an option. If you can't perform your duties, the temple will replace you. And if you're replaced, survival outside these walls is nearly impossible, so you keep breathing through the incense, keep hauling the jars, keep chewing the same bland bread, even as your body protests. You tell yourself that maybe tomorrow the rations will include figs, or maybe the river breeze will cool the temple halls. Small comforts, fleeting but enough to pull you into one more day. As you rub the grit from your eyes and prepare for another round of chants, you realize that in this life, health isn't measured by how strong you feel. It's measured by whether you're still standing when the temple bells ring again. Hey guys, tonight we drift back thousands of years, where the heat of Mesopotamia presses down on your shoulders, and the smell of incense mixes with dust in the air. You're walking down narrow alleys, the walls of mud brick houses leaning in on you, the rickety reed mats hanging in doorways, and somewhere ahead the temple towers over everything. Torches flicker even though the sun hasn't fully set, and smoke curls up from braziers at the entrance. That's where you're headed, toward a life most people wouldn't envy. You probably won't survive this in one piece, but since this is a sleepy history story, you'll manage to drift through, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing the little constellation of viewers glowing around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The temple's shadow stretches over you, and everything feels slightly muffled here, like the bricks themselves are absorbing sound. Your sandals scuff the ground, kicking up that familiar chalky dust. You can almost taste it, mixing with the bitter tang of burning resin. The entrance is busy, priests shuffling scrolls, young boys carrying jars of beer. Merchants muttering about offerings, and you, pressed into this life, are just another piece of the machinery. You think for a moment how ironic it is that a space meant for God smells more like sweaty bodies and goat hides than divine presence. Above, banners flap lazily in the evening wind. Each one is marked with the symbol of Inanna or Ishtar, depending on who's in favor this year. Their stars and lions loom over you like watchful eyes. By the time you've learned to cough through incense smoke and chew stale barley bread without complaint, you start noticing another kind of hazard that isn't physical at all. It's the endless stream of whispers, smirks, and petty rivalries that seem to fill every corner of the temple. The gods might rule in the heavens, but down here on earth, it's gossip that reigns supreme. You can hear it as you sweep the courtyard in the morning, 2 women hunched over, pretending to sort reeds, murmuring about who received more offerings last night. Someone else chuckles as they claim the high priest favored you with a glance, though you know it was only because you were standing in the wrong spot. In a world where you have almost nothing of your own, no wealth, no land, no free time, status is carved out in whispers. Even the pettiest rumor becomes a weapon sharper than bronze. historians still argue whether temple workers like you formed a tight-knit sisterhood or a bitterly competitive environment. The tablets rarely reveal emotion, only duties. But judging by the sharp looks you catch and the muttered comments that trail behind you, it feels less like a sisterhood and more like a never-ending contest where the prize is nothing more than survival. Sometimes, the rivalry turns downright comedic, if you weren't so tired. You've seen workers rearrange fruit baskets so the ripest figs end up in their quarters. You've caught others pretending to lose count of offerings, just to sneak a handful of dried dates for themselves. Once, one of the younger novices accidentally smeared soot across your freshly woven cloth, claiming clumsiness while smirking at the corner of her mouth. You wanted to throw the shuttle at her, but instead you smiled tightly and rewove the pattern. The gods might forgive accidents, but they rarely forgive open defiance. Quirky tidbit: ancient Mesopotamian curses often mention rivals at work. People would bury little clay tablets etched with phrases like "May my enemy's tongue swell until he can't gossip under thresholds." You sometimes wish you had a pocket full of those. Of course, the high priesthood pretends all of you work in harmony for the glory of Inanna. Harmony, in this case, means keeping your head bowed and your mouth shut. But the truth is that every chant, every procession, every ritual is threaded through with jealousy. Who stands closest to the goddess's statue? Who carries the sacred instruments? Who's entrusted to pour the first libation? These details might seem small, but inside the temple, they mark who matters and who doesn't. The worst part is how invisible these battles are to outsiders. To the merchants or pilgrims who arrive at the gates, the temple shines with order. They see robes in neat lines, hear chants in perfect rhythm, and smell incense drifting in dignified plumes. They don't hear the muttered "she's too old for this" or "he tripped again" that buzz in your ears after the ceremony. They don't see the smirk exchanged behind lowered eyes when someone stumbles during a dance. You try not to get pulled into it. You tell yourself the goddess watches, that pettiness isn't worth her attention. But when someone whispers that you're looking pale, too pale, and maybe the goddess has withdrawn her favor, you feel your stomach twist. Because here, reputation can mean the difference between staying in the temple and being cast out. And being cast out means starvation. Even your own friends, if you can call them that, sometimes slip daggers into their compliments. "You sang beautifully today," one murmurs, then adds with a sigh, "Of course, not as beautifully as when your voice was younger." You laugh it off, but the barb stays lodged in your mind all night. If you close your eyes, you can almost picture the goddess herself smirking at the spectacle, mortals clawing at each other with gossip, convinced their tiny victories matter in the grand order of stars and cities. You wonder if she laughs, or if she simply doesn't notice. Still, you carry on. You sweep, you chant, you weave, you bow. You tell yourself that maybe next time the gossip will turn towards someone else, and the temple's invisible daggers will pass you by. Until then, you keep your head down, your ears sharp, and your smile carefully measured. Because in this place, surviving the whispers is just as important as surviving the incense smoke. The year grinds forward until the temple bursts into its grandest ordeal, the sacred festivals. Outsiders imagine them as dazzling spectacles of divine joy, with music, feasts, and blessings flowing like wine. And yes, they are spectacles: drums pounding, horns blaring, garlands of flowers strewn over temple steps, statues paraded through the streets. But for you, trapped inside the machinery of ritual, they're less about glory and more about exhaustion. The biggest of all is the New Year festival, Akitu, when the city gathers to reaffirm its bond with the gods. Days of preparation come first, scrubbing every slab of stone until it shines, weaving endless garlands from reeds and flowers, and piling altars with offerings of fruit, bread, and beer. By the time the first horn sounds, your arms ache from carrying baskets and your fingers are raw from twisting stems into knots. The rituals themselves stretch for hours, sometimes days. You march in processions, chanting in rhythms that leave your throat dry and hoarse. The temple bellows with sound, drums echoing through your ribs, flutes shrill in your ears, and a chorus of voices that drowns out your own. You move as part of a mass, pushed and pulled, robes sticking to your skin in the heat. Mainstream fact: the Akita festival often lasted 12 days, involving processions, sacrifices, and reenactments of mythological battles between gods and chaos. Imagine surviving nearly 2 weeks of little sleep, constant ceremony, and duties that never let you rest. The worst comes at night, when the temple is supposed to embody divine union. Historians still argue whether the so-called sacred marriage was literal or symbolic, a ritual coupling between the king and a priestess representing Inanna. You, of course, don't get to debate. You're expected to assist, clean, sing, or simply be present while rumors swirl about what exactly happens behind heavy curtains. Some say it's symbolic, gestures, words, wine poured on the ground. Others whisper about flesh meeting flesh in the name of cosmic order. Either way, you're exhausted and still on duty, and when the festival ends, the city outside rejoices. Merchants boast of sales, families share leftover bread, children wave reeds like flags. You, on the other hand, collapse on your mat, legs trembling, hair reeking of smoke and sweat. The priests call it renewal. You call it survival. Quirky tidbit: clay tablets describe how, during festivals, temporary kings or mock prisoners might be paraded around for entertainment, only to vanish from the record afterward. You sometimes wonder if you'll vanish too. Swept away in the noise, your efforts forgotten the moment the drums stop. The strangest part is how little choice you have in any of it. If the goddess demands a dance, you dance until your knees wobble. If the priests need singers, you sing until your voice cracks. If offerings overflow, you carry them until your back screams. The divine doesn't care if you're tired. Neither do the priests. When the torches finally gutter out and silence spreads across the temple, you lie awake, staring at the reed ceiling above. The whole city calls the festival a triumph, a bond between mortals and gods. But in your bones, it feels less like triumph and more like being wrung dry, like a rag squeezed until not a drop remains. The irony is almost funny, if you're not too tired to laugh. Festivals are supposed to uplift the spirit, but for you they do nothing but drag you further down. Still, when the next year rolls around, the horns will blare again, and you'll rise with the crowd, because that's what survival demands. After the festival, life in the temple doesn't pause, it just shifts gears. You trudge back into the quieter routines, but the air still hums with residual energy. Everyone is exhausted, but the priests expect perfection. Dust still has to be swept, lamps cleaned, and offerings arranged as if the celebration never happened. Your body protests, but obedience is the currency here. You begin your day with the early morning purification ritual. The water is icy and thin, barely covering your hands and feet. Every splash leaves goosebumps in its wake, but you repeat the motions, muttering prayers that have lost all rhythm or meaning. Historians still argue whether purification rituals were spiritual necessities or a way to maintain control over temple laborers. From your perspective, they feel like another layer of duty that never ends. Once you're clean, you're thrust into song. Chanting fills the corridors, voices overlapping in a monotonous tide. You try to match the rhythm, though your throat protests with every note. The words, praises to Inanna, mean little anymore. They're part of the machinery, a performance that keeps the temple's walls humming and the city outside thinking the goddess is present in every gesture. A quirky tidbit: some hymns include instructions for how many times to bow, how to gesture with each finger, and even the precise tilt of the head. Mess up once, and a priest frowns as if the universe might collapse. You've tripped over the rules more than once, and it never fails to make your cheeks burn. After chanting, you are assigned to prepare offerings. Today, it's bread and beer, stacked meticulously on clay plates. You've grown expert at balancing loaves while keeping track of the exact number of jars. Yet even in this repetitive work, there's a tiny tension. If you miscount, someone else might get blamed, and the priest's patience is thin. You glance at a colleague, hoping your shared misery brings some silent camaraderie, but everyone is too weary to even meet eyes. The temple's hierarchy is brutal. A slight nod from a priest can elevate you in reputation, a frown can humiliate you for days. You've learned the delicate dance: look devoted, act competent, never draw attention, but always be visible enough to fulfill duties. It's exhausting, and yet it's the only way to survive. And then there's the food. Lunch is meager, porridge or bread, occasionally flavored with honey or dried fruit, never enough to fully satisfy. You eat quickly, keeping your eyes down, because the ritual doesn't allow indulgence. Quirky tidbit: tablets suggest that sometimes temple workers would sneak small bites of stolen figs or dates. Considered minor acts of rebellion. You occasionally fantasize about doing the same, imagining sweetness on your tongue that isn't rationed or measured. Even chores aren't simple. Cleaning the lamps, polishing bronze, dusting statues, these are acts of devotion, but they also test your patience. You scrape years of soot from crevices while chanting mechanically. The rhythm is hypnotic, but your mind drifts: the alleys outside, the marketplace, even a simple breeze across your skin. You remember moments when you weren't bound to duty, and you ache for them, though you know they're gone forever. By late afternoon, you're shuffled into another set of rituals. Prayers, offerings, chants, more incense. Your hands ache, your throat burns, and the walls seem to close in. Yet even here, there's a small relief: the repetition numbs the fear and humiliation, dulls the anxiety about the patrons, the priests, and the constant eyes of your peers. Monotony, strangely, becomes a kind of sanctuary. At the end of the day, you collapse onto your mat, exhausted and sore, but surviving. You watch the temple ceiling darken in the evening shadows, and for a brief moment, you let yourself imagine a life elsewhere. Streets with laughter, food that smells like something other than smoke, nights where no one dictates your every movement. But as sleep drifts over you, you know tomorrow will bring the same grind, the same rituals, the same challenges. Survival in this temple is relentless, but you've learned to endure, day by day, moment by moment. The seasons shift slowly outside the temple walls, but inside, time is measured differently, by tasks completed, chants recited, and offerings arranged. You wake before dawn again, as always, your body stiff and sore, and you trudge to the basin for purification. The water is cold, lapping against your wrists and ankles, and you shiver despite the warmth of the day to come. There's a rhythm to it, though, a rhythm that has become your anchor, even if it feels more like chains than solace. The courtyard fills with workers, each performing their duties with mechanical precision. Some sweep, some grind barley, others set out offerings for priests and patrons alike. Every step, every motion is observed. Recorded in the temple's invisible ledger of behavior. Fail to comply, and whispers spread. Mistake a chant, and the frown of a priest follows you for days. You've learned to keep your head low, your hands steady, and your eyes polite, even when your mind wants to wander far, far away. Mainstream fact: temple life was rigidly hierarchical, with priests controlling both rituals and laborers. The role of women dedicated to temple service varied widely, from performing sacred rites to menial work, but all were bound by strict rules. You feel the weight of these rules every moment. Today, your task involves preparing ritual garments. The fabrics are heavy, embroidered with symbols that reference myths you've memorized but never fully understood. You lay them out, smooth wrinkles, check the alignment of every trim. One false fold could draw the disapproval of the overseeing priest. You keep your movements careful, precise, almost robotic. Quirky tidbit: some texts suggest that temple garments were occasionally scented with herbs to attract divine favor. In practice, that means carrying bundles of dried thyme and frankincense all day, and breathing in a cloud of dust that makes your eyes water. It's supposed to honor the goddess, but all you feel is the tickle of powder in your nose and the fatigue in your arms. After that, you assist in setting up for midday rituals. The priests arrive, robes rustling, lips moving in prayers you've heard countless times. Patrons, if any, are positioned in carefully measured spots, and you move silently among them, adjusting offerings, pouring wine, and ensuring the temple looks flawless. No one notices the effort, they only see the outward presentation. And if you falter, the consequences ripple quietly but painfully, another warning, another whispered reprimand. Historians still argue about the social status of temple women. Some sources claim they enjoyed privileges unavailable to commoners, like protection from certain legal penalties, while others suggest they were merely trapped in a gilded cage, bound to labor without hope of advancement. From where you stand, it feels like a cage, painted with gold but no less confining. During the brief break after rituals, you sit with a few colleagues in a shadowed corner. Whispered complaints escape like soft smoke, a borrowed basket never returned, a spilled portion of beer, a song sung slightly off rhythm. For a few moments, you share small laughs, tiny rebellions against the weight of duty, but the respite is fleeting. The temple calls again. The goddess demands more, the priests demand more, and the cycle continues. You feel your body aching, your throat dry, but there's a strange endurance settling into your bones. Years, or at least months, of repetition have taught you how to survive, how to make it through long days, endless rituals, and the constant pressure of observation. Survival is no longer just physical, it's mental, emotional, and spiritual. Each small victory, keeping a chant in rhythm, balancing jars without spilling, finishing your portion of bread, is a claim to existence in a world that constantly reminds you of your limitations. As evening falls, you finally retreat to your mat. The courtyard is quiet, broken only by a distant goat bleating and the rustle of reeds in the wind. Your muscles ache, your lungs still taste of incense, and the day's exhaustion presses against you like a heavy blanket. You close your eyes, feeling the temple's shadows stretch across the walls, and for a moment, you allow yourself to dream of freedom, a life where you choose when to eat, when to sleep, and who to see. But the mat beneath you is hard, the night's chill seeps in, and the goddess's presence is inescapable. So you inhale deeply, hold the tension in your body, and wait for the dawn to pull you back into its endless rhythm once again. Night never really arrives in the temple, it just shifts into a quieter kind of labor. You lie on your reed mat, muscles stiff, eyes half closed, yet the work doesn't fully stop. Someone whispers, someone coughs, incense smolders, and the pulse of the temple continues in a muted, relentless hum. Sleep feels like a brief interlude, an unauthorized pause in a day that belongs to the goddess. When you finally rise, hours before dawn, the chill in the courtyard bites through your shawl. You drag yourself to the basin, splashing cold water over your wrists and ankles. Even this ritual feels mechanical, performed not for refreshment but because it's required. You glance around at the others. Some already chanting softly, some leaning against the wall, trying to wake without fully waking. Historians still argue whether these pre-dawn routines were meant to honor deities or merely to instill discipline in the temple's human machinery. From where you stand, it's hard to see the difference. Breakfast is another exercise in endurance. The same bland porridge, the same coarse bread. Today, at least, a few dates are tucked into the meal, relics of leftover offerings. You chew slowly, savoring them like contraband treasure, aware that every bite is a fleeting delight in a life dictated by ritual. Quirky tidbit: some workers would hide figs in their shawls for later, a tiny act of rebellion against the temple's strict rationing rules. You consider it, but decide it's safer to eat what's given. Tasks pile up immediately afterward. Today, you assist in preparing ceremonial torches for a smaller rite, the flames meant to carry prayers to the heavens. You check every wick, ensure every oil jar is full, and carry them to the courtyard, trying not to stumble over your own feet. Each movement is under scrutiny, a misstep could be interpreted as negligence, and the priests are never slow to note such errors. The ceremonies themselves blur together, chants, offerings, gestures repeated until exhaustion. You follow the priestess leading the rites, your arms moving as they instruct, your voice echoing lines you barely hear. Outside the temple, merchants and townsfolk might admire the spectacle, but inside, it's a relentless cycle of precision and scrutiny. You're reminded that your body and voice exist not for yourself, but as instruments of ritual perfection. Physical strain is only half the story. Your mind is constantly alert, monitoring subtle cues, a priest's frown, a colleague's muttered complaint, a guest lingering too long near the sacred altar. The temple is a theater, and you're a performer whose mistakes could ripple far beyond the immediate moment. Mistakes are punished quietly but effectively, warnings whispered, minor chores added, reputation subtly eroded, even small moments of comfort are rare. You glance at a narrow beam of sunlight sneaking through the latticed window. It illuminates dust motes that swirl lazily, a tiny miracle in a world dominated by routine. You allow yourself a deep breath, savoring the warmth for a heartbeat, knowing the next ritual will soon snatch it away. Quirky detail, some temple murals depict the goddess herself watching her attendants with an amused expression, almost as if she finds their struggles entertaining. Whether that's divine observation or artistic flair, it feels eerily accurate in your experience. By late afternoon, your energy wanes. Tasks are still required, but your movements are slower, more deliberate. The temple's rhythm doesn't bend for fatigue. Still, you've adapted, you've learned when to conserve energy, when to push, and when to let monotony carry you forward. There's a strange, grim satisfaction in completing a task perfectly despite exhaustion, a tiny assertion of control in an environment designed to strip it away. As night approaches, you return to your mat. The courtyard is quiet now, the last lamps guttering out, casting long shadows across the reed mats. You wrap your shawl tightly, muscles screaming in protest, and close your eyes, allowing the temple's hum to lull you toward rest. Tomorrow will demand the same endurance, the same submission, the same relentless repetition. But for a brief moment, you are alone with your thoughts, and that solitude, however fleeting, is a small victory in a life dictated by divine and human authority alike. The temple calendar marches on, each day folding into the next, and you start noticing the cumulative toll. Your muscles ache in ways that weren't there last year, your joints protest each step, and the calluses on your hands have thickened like armor. It's not just physical wear, it's the creeping erosion of spirit, the dulling of curiosity and desire. You wake, you work, you sleep, and somehow you still survive. Rituals take on a monotonous rhythm that numbs both body and mind. You spend hours arranging offerings, chanting prayers, sweeping floors, and polishing lamps. Every gesture has meaning, every step scrutinized, yet the meaning often feels abstract and remote. Historians still argue whether repeated ritual labor was meant to instill devotion or merely enforce obedience. For you, it doesn't much matter, both outcomes feel the same when exhaustion outweighs understanding. Today, your task is more subtle. You're to observe the novices, whispering instructions, correcting their stance, guiding their chants. Authority in this small domain feels bittersweet. You wield power over someone else, but it's the same power that has been imposed upon you. Quirky tidbit, some novice tablets suggest they would intentionally mispronounce divine names just to test the patience of senior attendants. You smile thinly at the memory, remembering a time you nearly lashed out, only to remind yourself that survival trumps pride. The social pressures continue. Temple gossip spins quietly in every corner. Who got favored, who was ignored, who accidentally spilled a jar of beer. Every observation is a thread in an invisible web. One misstep, and the subtle hierarchy shifts against you. You've learned to navigate it carefully, offering smiles and nods that appear genuine but are practiced gestures of self-preservation. There's a strange sort of camaraderie hidden in these dynamics. You exchange whispered advice with colleagues, small bits of humor in dark corners, minor acts of rebellion like sharing a stolen date or swapping chores. These fleeting moments are fragile, yet they offer a reprieve from the relentless grind. Physical hazards remain ever present. The temple's incense has left your lungs perpetually ticklish, dust settles in crevices of your skin, mingling with sweat and grime, fleas, and other parasites continue their uninvited feasts. Sometimes you pause mid-task, feeling a strange kinship with the creeping, crawling things you can neither evict nor fully ignore, as evening descends. The sounds of the city seep into the temple, a distant horn, the murmur of voices outside, the clatter of carts on cobblestones. You imagine life beyond these walls, where sunlight warms your skin without restriction, where food smells delicious rather than utilitarian, where sleep isn't punctuated by ritual demands. It's a fleeting fantasy, but it carries you through the last tasks of the day. Finally, you return to your mat, muscles screaming from the day's labor, body slick with sweat and dust. Wrapping your shawl around yourself, you let your mind drift, replaying small victories, a chant held without error, an offering arranged perfectly, a whispered laugh shared with a colleague. These moments, however tiny, are proof that you endure, that you matter in some small way in a world that often ignores you. You close your eyes, letting the temples hum, a mix of incense smoke, distant prayers, and the faint rustle of mats, lull you toward sleep. Tomorrow will demand the same. But tonight, even briefly, you remember that survival itself is a kind of ritual, one that requires no priest, no patron, no goddess's gaze. It's all yours. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months, and you begin to notice how the subtle politics of the temple shift with astonishing speed. A new priest arrives, robes heavier than any you've seen before, and instantly the balance of authority trembles. Someone who was once favored is now overlooked, a colleague who whispered jokes in the shadows is suddenly promoted to a more visible position, leaving others feeling the sting of envy. You've learned to watch, to adapt, to place yourself just enough outside the line of fire while still performing your duties flawlessly. Your daily tasks continue, sweeping, chanting, arranging offerings, polishing bronze, monitoring novices. The repetition is almost meditative, though your body protests at every movement. You wake with stiff muscles, your hands raw, your back tight, yet there is a strange rhythm to the labor, a cadence you follow unconsciously. Historians still debate whether this repetition was intended as spiritual discipline or simply as a method of control, but it feels both comforting and imprisoning at once. Sometimes, small surprises break the monotony. A bird slips through the open door and lands on the altar, pecking at crumbs. A child from a visiting family drops a flower into a bowl of offerings and runs giggling away. The priests barely notice, but for you, these tiny intrusions of unpredictability are a reminder that the world beyond a temple exists. And that life is sometimes not entirely dictated by ritual. Quirky tidbit: some tablets mention playful bets among temple workers about which animals would sneak in next, a cat, a goat, even the occasional snake. It's the kind of light amusement that keeps morale from crumbling entirely, a fleeting rebellion against the suffocating schedule. The social hierarchies are ever present. A simple slip of the tongue, a misaligned offering, a too loud laugh, each can ripple through the delicate web of temple politics. You tread carefully, measuring every glance, every word. At times, it feels like a dance choreographed in invisible ink, steps known only to those who have survived the long years of service. Illness and fatigue remain constant threats. Your lungs still sting from incense, your stomach often protests the meager rations, and parasites continue their quiet feasts. Yet somehow, your body has adapted, endurance becomes second nature. You're no longer just surviving, you've learned to exist within the rigid rhythms of temple life. Evenings are a peculiar solace. The hum of incense, the quiet murmur of other workers settling into their mats, and the faint flicker of oil lamps create a cocoon of soft sounds. You can rest without guilt, even as tomorrow promises the same grind. Small acts, sharing a stolen fig, a whispered joke, a supportive glance, become lifelines, evidence that amidst ritual and monotony, connection still persists. As night deepens, you lie back and feel the weight of the day drain from your body. Your muscles relax, your mind quiets, and the temple seems to breathe along with you. The gods are distant, the priests vigilant, but in these fleeting moments of calm, you reclaim a sliver of autonomy. It's fragile, ephemeral, but it is yours, and it is enough to carry you through yet another day of ritual, labor, and survival. Time has a peculiar quality in the temple. It stretches, compresses, and folds in on itself, so that days, weeks, and years blur into one continuous rhythm of labor, ritual, and survival. By now, you move through the spaces almost on autopilot. Your muscles remember the routines even when your mind doesn't, your hands arrange offerings without conscious thought, and your voice chants the sacred words in near-perfect cadence. Yet beneath the surface, every fiber of you is shaped by the temple's endless demands. Today, like every day, begins before dawn. You rise on your reed mat, shoulders stiff, limbs reluctant. The courtyard is quiet, save for the distant calls of merchants setting up outside the gates and the faint splash of water from the purification basin. You step into the pre-dawn chill, splashing cold water over your wrists and ankles, and feel the familiar shiver crawl along your spine. There's comfort in routine, even if that comfort is wrapped in fatigue. Rituals fill the hours, offerings carried, lamps lit, chants repeated, incense burned. Each task demands precision. One misstep could draw the quiet disapproval of a priest, the subtle censure of a colleague, or even a whispered rumor that lingers longer than you would like. Historians still argue whether the temple's hierarchy was a reflection of divine order or simply human control disguised as sacred duty. For you, it hardly matters. The hierarchy is real enough in the bruises it leaves on your body and spirit. Quirky detail: some rituals involve arranging offerings in patterns meant to mirror the constellations, so that every grain of barley and every drop of wine aligns with cosmic geometry. You wonder how the stars would judge your uneven rows, or if they care at all, but you arrange them meticulously anyway. Social dynamics remain a constant undercurrent. You navigate the gossip, subtle competitions, and fleeting alliances with care. Even small gestures, sharing a stolen fig, a whispered joke, a nod of approval, become vital acts of survival. You've learned who to trust, who to avoid, and when to let your presence be almost invisible. Physical fatigue has become a quiet companion. Your hands are calloused, your back sore, your throat raw from endless chanting. Yet in some perverse way, your body's endurance is a testament to resilience. You've learned to pace yourself, to conserve energy, and to find small moments of relief wherever possible: a patch of sunlight on the floor, the fleeting sweetness of a date. The hum of incense carrying your thoughts away from the monotony. Even as the temple demands everything, you find ways to assert tiny victories. Completing a task flawlessly, sharing a laugh with a colleague, or stealing a brief moment of solitude becomes a subtle rebellion. It's evidence that even in a life dictated by ritual, labor, and observation, you remain, stubbornly, fully yourself. As the day ends, the temple quiets. You settle onto your mat, muscles aching but spirit intact. The incense lingers, the shadows stretch across the reed mats, and the faint hum of the temple envelopes you. You close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will demand the same endurance, the same precision, the same submission, but tonight, you are allowed a moment of calm. The rhythm of survival, repeated countless times, has forged a strange harmony: one part duty, one part resilience, and one part quiet, hard-won freedom. Night deepens, and the temple breathes a slower, softer rhythm. The harsh clangs, the voices, the incense, they all fade into a gentle hum that settles around you like a blanket. You lie on your mat, feeling the cool touch of the reed beneath your body, the faint stiffness in your joints easing as the hours of labor release their grip. Outside, the wind whispers through open doorways, rustling the curtains and carrying the scent of distant gardens, markets, and streets where life flows at a different pace. Your thoughts drift gently. You imagine a sky that stretches endlessly, stars blinking softly above, unconcerned with human toil. You picture a world beyond the temple walls, sunlight warming your skin. Food that smells sweet, laughter shared freely without calculation or fear. The temple is still there, its shadows deep and its rituals ongoing, but in this moment, it exists only as background, a hum beneath the quiet of your breath, even your memories of the day's labor lose their sharp edges. The repetitive motions, the chants, the incense, they blur into patterns, almost soothing, almost meditative. The gossip, the hierarchy, the endless scrutiny, they dissolve into gentle shadows at the edges of your mind. You are tired, yes, but you are also present. Every ache, every small victory, every breath you take reminds you that you are still here, still enduring, still yourself, slowly. Your body surrenders to sleep. The harsh rhythms of the temple fade entirely, leaving only warmth, comfort, and the steady, reassuring beat of your own heart. The world can wait. The goddess can wait. The temple can wait. For now, you are simply here, simply breathing, and simply resting. And in this gentle surrender, there is peace.